Might as well get started. I call the Planning, Environment, and Development Committee meeting of October 4th to order. Lost track of what day it was there for a second. Roll call. Mr. Gattemuller.
Here.
Carolyn Campbell.
Here.
Carolyn Schofield.
Here.
Jeff Schwartz.
Here.
Michelle Aving.
Here.
Molly Jensen.
Here.
And Teresa Meshes.
Here.
So it looks like we're all here this morning. Great. We didn't have any minutes printed for approval, is that correct?
No, Tiana will finish them up when she comes back.
Oh, okay. Yeah, Tiana's out for a few weeks. So there's no minutes for approval. Go to public comment.
Jeff, anybody has anything?
Yep, I'll get it. I got it. Mr. Vanderspool sounds like he's the only one on public comment, so I don't need that.
So corner adequate or other corner?
By that microphone.
Mic is there, so. I'm Jan Vanderspool. I'll call myself Mr. Sealing Anger Bull Run Estates. I've provided 9 possible discussion points, with those very obviously as ADU with larger bold numbering, although I believe they all derive from ADU impacts, which would justify all as ADU agenda items, ancillary dwelling units. I hope for tenacity and discussion of all items to carry forward to however many meetings it takes. I hope those items bring the overall scope of the impact of it that an ADU can have to the forefront, especially when noting the 44-year-old existence of the subdivision as it formerly existed. Also, especially note the legacy practice of engineered stormwater detention site maintenance being the sole responsibility solely on a specific lot of site location, with any erosion changes significant to that maintenance. I believe I have personally been harmed by, first, two, by my neighbor and my oak subsequent death, with anticipation for more front ditch dumps, excess water volume, and erosion contribution. Too bad, I know it's not zoning, but it's kind of education related too, which is a theme of some of my points. Second, attitude reminiscent of Generation Y entitlement that added impervious surface with no consideration in view of flooding already experienced. Incidentally, you have an elevation map. Look at elevation 950 feet and compare that to the so-called historic flood level. It's a huge, much larger area. That's what we experienced in the last 3 years. And degraded erosion. Too bad, again, so sad, but I think site conditions should have warranted at least a zoning issue or a pause. Mental stress from anticipation of potential chlorine water dumps and sump puff discharge, changing the nature of the street side, ditch condition, and more erosion. Again, too bad, so sad, but the education thing can have continuity to subsequent owners, especially chlorine. I believe the neighbor to the east of the ADU has been harmed by added impervious surface, contributing more to the flood hazard of their lower level. I believe the subdivision has been harmed by the change in the tenor, kind of a cityscape now of formerly for 44 years single-family E3 houses. I learned over this weekend of documented damage in the subdivision from the unmaintained engineering stormwater retention on the most western lot of the subdivision, Lot 1. The house on Lot 2 had their barn rot damaged by standing water behind the debris dam. Joanna Coletti was asked by the new partial owner for guidance because the barn owner was pleading for relief. Beyond that dam was thick brush and a large tree big enough to also block drainage. complete disappearance of the underground storage tank under about 1.5 feet of silt had also completely filled and blocked the settling tank feeding the dry wells. The result was water retention rather than the designed water percolation. I don't think I'm overemphasizing the impact to me as an owner of one of those lots, storm drainage. Please consider and discuss my items to help me out of any repeat incidents. My seething continues to continues through my pores. I imagine going to court would require starting with about $50K budget for covenant enforcement. I don't know, it's a sad process. Help me out, thanks.
Okay, thank you for your time. No other public comments that I've seen listed. We'll move on to members' comments. Do any of the members have comments this morning? Okay, no members' comments. We'll move on to new business. Mr. William Ziemek, am I pronouncing that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, great. If you'd like to step up, right there in that corner is the microphone. Great. Thank you, Peter. Okay, I see you're here to be interviewed for the Historic Preservation Committee. You just tell us your name, a little bit about yourself, and why you'd like to be on the committee.
Sure. My name is William Ziemek. I've been a member of Lake in the Hills for the last 16 years. I've been in the construction industry for approximately 21 years. My background is commercial and industrial preservation to historic buildings of the city of Chicago. I've worked, other than Chicago, downtown Milwaukee, Rockford. I have been in Dixon County Courthouse. I feel like right now I'm at the point in my career where I'd like to give back to the community and will grow a little bit more as a project manager and be able to take and give from the team that I would be working with if I'm appointed or elected to the commission. I think I have a lot to contribute to the county, and I can be of some assistance.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great. Do any committee members have questions for? Go ahead, Jeff first, please.
You mentioned these other cities that you worked in. Is this in the business of working on historic buildings? Is that what you're?
Yes, sir. So I work for a construction company that's based out of Chicago. We have other offices in the Midwest and down in Florida. Our bread and butter is historic preservation, so I've worked on Chicago Union Station, Museum of Science and Industry, 745 Wacker, Shed Aquarium, several buildings up in the Milwaukee area, Rockford schools that are over 100 years old. And what we go do is we go in, we do an initial inspection of the facade, and then we go in and work with either the Chicago Historic Preservation Act or Illinois and bring these buildings back up to speed. Currently, I'm working for the University of Chicago on 2 of their buildings right now and restoring them.
Thank you.
Paula, did you have something?
Yes. Are you at all familiar with the Lake and the Hills Historical Commission? Arden and Bill Spuden?
No, I'm not.
And the preservation of the schoolhouse that they moved to one side of the road to another to the playground, and other things that they have done, like the Levain Hayne House. So I was just asking about your activities in the village of Lake and Hills as far as historical preservation.
No, I haven't reached out or resourced anything within my own community of Lake in the Hills. I was kind of hoping to target the county as it circles Lake in the Hills, Algonquin, all the townships in the area, McHenry, Woodstock. I was before not affiliated with Lake in the Hills, but when Ed Plaza was president over there, I was kind of working a little bit with him on certain aspects, but other than that, no, I have not reached out to the preservation for Lake in the Hills.
Okay, Carolyn Schofield?
Thanks. First, I want to thank you for applying. I mean, your background is just great and really fitting. And I don't know if you've given any thought, but sometimes with the Historic Preservation Commission, the one challenge that I think occurs is finding that balance of preserving properties that have the significant historical representation, but at the same time, personal property rights. So do you have any experience with that or any thoughts on how you find that balance?
Right now, I'm on a project called Brent House. It's located downtown, right off of the skirts of University of Chicago, and it's marked orange, historic orange by the city of Chicago. It's a private house that is about a little over 100 years old, and we are in the same process of trying to appease the owner by upgrading their home, but at the same time, we have to hold to the standards of the orange tag on the house. So you have to play a delicate game of, okay, we know we have to hold true to our construction industry standards, which migrate from year to year as there's new standards, new technologies, new materials, but you also want to still hold on to that preservation factor.
Yeah.
A simple way of putting it would be, instead of using terracotta, use cast stone or a limestone that you could paint with a glaze. Certain things of that nature where the homeowner would get a more specific and durable product than techniques that were used back in the old days, I should say.
Yeah, so, Teresa, do you have something?
Yes, have you had a chance to either listen to or attend a historic preservation meeting?
No, ma'am, I have not. I've been on the county website. I looked for a couple of meeting minutes, but every time I've clicked on a PDF, it says there was no meeting or there was unable to download.
Oh, okay, all right.
That's curious, we should look into that.
Right, yes.
Okay. And Carolyn Campbell?
No, just more of a comment. I think it's great that you're applying. I appreciate the fact that you want to get more involved, and I think your background is probably exactly what is needed for
Thank you.
historic preservation, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Joe?
And I would echo that. I have been here when we've had great debates about whether something should be plaqued, even though the local person didn't want it plaqued, and what shape it was in, and how many literally hundreds of thousands of dollars it would take to fix up a piece of property that really was finished. So to have somebody in the industry on there who could actually help make that evaluation before it got to us would be great.
That's great.
Thank you.
Yeah, I agree. Very good. Anything else? Well, thank you for coming in, and thank you for applying for the position.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think we'll move on to 5.2, which is deliberation and selection for the Historic Preservation Commission.
I'll make a motion to select William Ziemek for the one position.
Seconded by Carolyn. Okay, motion by Teresa, seconded by Carolyn Campbell.
Is this for the 26th or the 24th?
I'm sorry.
I was just gonna ask.
I would say maybe expire the 26.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay. Is that okay, Carolyn Campbell as the second?
Yeah.
26?
Uh-huh.
Okay. Any discussion?
No,
Mr. Gattemeyer?
I'm in favor of him. I looked at his resume and what he does for a day-to-day existence, and that's exactly what this commission needs.
Invaluable, yeah,
Mhm.
I agree. So,
Very good.
Is there just one other vacancy? And I know that's.
As far as I know, I don't know if Peter just stepped out, but
Can I ask a question?
Kathy, is that?
So we have one open position that is a vacant position, and that's the one that expires in 2024. And then Susan Zeller's position expired on 11/26 of '21, so that's the other position. And then there is a third one listed on the website because there's another term coming due this November. So we'll fill this one and we'll still get the two.
okay.
Is there, a question? Would the applicant have been thinking one way or the other in terms of what they thought they were applying for?
Yeah, I didn't catch that, but it's usually that would
Is
be
he
asked
still
of the
outside?
applicant, but.
I don't know, he went out.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I think we're okay to move forward with this, and if there's an issue, we can deal with it.
Sure.
So, any other discussion? We'll go to vote. Teresa?
Yes.
Paula?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yeah.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Carolyn Campbell?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes. So Mr. Ziemek will be moved forward to the,
Can I just, sorry, make a
That's good.
comment? And, because I know that historically, this historic preservation has had trouble with quorums because of lack of appointments. So that's why I asked that question before, so hopefully we can get them filled.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And maybe we need to look at that website and figure out why people can't find. as
It
Mr.
may be a
Ziemek
lack of a
said.
quorum.
Pardon?
It may be a lack of a
It may
quorum.
be,
Right,
but-
that's what, I know historically it happens.
It appears that the meeting in June was canceled, but it just appears they have minutes from May that they just haven't been publishing them. So the meetings have taken place, they haven't published them. So I'll reach out to whoever's in PED that takes care of that. Maybe they just don't know what to scribe.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
It's Audrey.
It's Audrey?
Publishes, but
I'll work with her.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank
she
you.
probably just doesn't
Sorry.
know what to click to get the minutes on there.
Okay.
Sounds
In
good,
East.
Kathy, thank you. Okay. We can move on to 5.3, McHenry County Stormwater Management Ordinance Variance. Adam, can you bring us a little?
Sorry.
That's okay.
Sure.
Come on forward and give us a little background on what we got going on with this.
So this is a variation from the SMO. It does come before this committee. There's a prescribed set of standards that any ordinance violation, any ordinance variation would have to meet. Ancillary Stormwater Division provided some background, some details, but really it's an independent, it's just a factual statement of where it's been. This has been a long time coming in terms of from the applicants and the discussions and trying to iron this out. So really what it is, it's let them come up, give the presentation, and staff, Joanna and myself will be here for technical questions, any other additional questions that you may need or have. But we'll turn the stage over to Mark Salvin. I believe, Mark, right?
Well,
These are your boards?
I appreciate it, but my star witness just left the room.
Uh-oh. All right, well,
So, Mr. Chairman, if you wanted to skip the agenda item for this and pass us over for any other item that might be here, if you give us a minute.
Yeah, okay. Well, we have that would be moving on to the
UDO text
UDO ordinance
yeah,
text
the
amendment.
text amendment will be a pretty clean and good one to run through. So the UDO amendments,
Okay.
I'll have, do you want us up front for
Yeah,
any of these?
you need up, just because that's where the microphones are at.
Okay. I'll have Renee come up as well, but give you the background of the UDO amendments before you. So every year we'll put together some semblance of whether they're technical adjustments, items that have been identified to be errant in the ordinance. These items were pulled out and recognized because we had two technical adjustments in a subdivision and then a re-subdivision. So it was the first real pass-through of the UDO for any subdivision practices, and we identified a couple inconsistencies and items that just need to be ironed out. I would publicly say Renee and her staff jumped through a lot of hoops to make sure that it looked and felt good to the applicants, even in times when it wasn't totally comfortable for them. But I think with the proposal before you will make it kind of much more easily digested as we get more subdivision applications, hopefully, in the next upcoming years.
So you're looking for a consensus from the committee to move this forward is all, because then it's gonna go to the ZBA and public hearings anyway?
Correct.
Right? Okay.
Correct, so, yeah, apologize, the meat of it. So, yeah, there'd be a consensus from the committee here to go forward, and then we would bring it, the next step would be to go to the site plan review committee, which is the initial group that will look at it from a technical standpoint, any application that comes through from a land use perspective. That group will provide a little bit more of the technical background in terms of what documents would be needed at what stage, but this committee would look at it from kind of an overarching perspective. And then it would go from there to the ZBA and then to county board as a whole for adoption.
Okay, well, personally, I read through this and I thought it was fine to move it forward. Does anyone else have any questions regarding it? Go to Carolyn Schofield.
Does it come back then after ZBA? Or does it go into county board?
It goes on to county board
Okay.
after
For
ZBA.
some reason, I thought we saw it after ZBA.
It comes back to us as part of what's coming up
To the county board.
to the county board,
Yeah,
but it
okay.
doesn't come back to us for a decision.
But
It comes to the county board for decision. It's just, we get the information as we do at the end of all these agendas, where it says
Oh.
ZBA official
Did we,
reports.
discuss it though again last time? I for some reason thought there was an issue that we,
Well,
Last time, the ZBA had suggested some changes.
right?
And so I brought those to your attention. and
Okay,
you guys
so if they
discussed
do, then
those.
that comes back, okay.
Yeah, that's what.
Yeah, okay. But just as Mr. Gottemuller said, just in the context of the zoning officer report that you get during the
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Is there anyone against moving this forward, letting it go forward? Okay.
I support moving it forward.
Pardon?
I support moving it
Yeah,
forward.
yeah, so do I, so that's fine. Anything else you need from us on that item, or?
No, no, we don't. We'll
Okay.
see you next month.
Okay, sounds good on that part.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
Okay, we'll move back to 5.3. Mark? Yeah,
Good morning.
either side you're comfortable with, Mark. I know your
Yeah.
boards are over there. If you need them, that's fine. Whatever you're comfortable with.
Thank you.
Or you can sit down in front of us.
Well, good morning. My name is Mark Saladin. I'm an attorney at Zane Code Wright Saladin in Crystal Lake. We're here on behalf of the petitioner, Thielen Sand and Gravel. Your role today is, kind of unique because it's as the oversight committee under the Stormwater Management Ordinance to make a decision on a requested variance that Thielen Sand and Gravel has this morning. Basically, our variance is in order to allow certain mining activities at a site in Lakemore, Illinois. We're requesting a variance of certain mitigation items under your ordinance. Basically, in lieu of traditional compensatory wetland mitigation, the petitioner is proposing the following. Number one, the donation of a 26-acre addition of land fee simple to the Goose Lake Conservation Area for the McHenry County Conservation District. Replacement of the stormwater and water quality improvement functions on site at the Lakemore parcel. This will be accomplished through the excavation of existing high ground to create additional stormwater storage and flow path modifications in order to promote better water quality reaching the Fox River. Creation of a complex of large bodies of water surrounding uplands and a trail network that will be eventually donated to the village of Lakemore as a public open space, creating a connection to public lands to the north and south, and creation of at least 300 acre-feet of new stormwater storage connected to the Lily Lake drain. So what I'm going to do is turn it over to Dan Shepard, who's the Executive Vice President of Thielen Sand and Gravel. Dan's going to give you a little background as to why we're here today, how we got to this point. Dan.
Good morning. Thank you. Just maybe as a little background, and I apologize, I didn't realize you wouldn't be able to see this as much, but maybe I'll hold it up here so it's a little better. What this represents is Thielen Sand and Gravel has approximately 736 acres located in Lakemore on Route 120. This project has approximately 17 acres, well, we'll call it 16.3 to be exact, located approximately right here. Within that design, right here, I'm gonna get my finger upside down, right? Right here it's located. That was approved in our mining application for mining, but obviously requires mitigation for that to be mined. So as a part of a process that was started in 2020, we implemented a concept of creating 8.5 miles of bike trail easements on our properties. They're not on road, but are physically on our properties, in exchange for several different items, one of which is going to become the mitigation for this 17 acres that's located here. So as a part of that, we've come up with concept designs on trails, everything else. Kenosha County is actually in beginning concept of putting and installing in their bike trails. So this larger map kind of represents the conclusion of what we've been working with Hay and Associates over the last year in enhancing the original concept plan for mitigation for this 17 acres as well as the entire site. So you will see in here, we are creating beds for hatcheries and fish, wildlife ponds inside of an existing 26-acre wetland area, and within this, 2 other shelves that would do that. And we are also taking if you're not familiar with Lily Lake drainage, which is part of Lily Lake, it drains across into the Fox Lake. We will be accepting Lily Lake into this 300-acre body of water to allow it to be cleansed before it is discharged back to the lake. Also, this will allow 300 acre feet of storage, stormwater storage, to prevent any flooding coming through Lily Lake drain into the river. So conceptually, this is what the entire plan is, just as a part of background of what the 17 acres. As we mine, just so everyone is aware, the water level of this will go lower than the actual 16.32 acre elevation. So as this is mined, this lake will become larger, the water elevation goes down, and over time, the character of that 16 acres will change. As in the water levels will decrease, and it'll be less of a wetland than it is today. Not that that's our point, but just over time. So as a part of our exercise, we have submitted a request for the entire thing to mitigate the 16.32 acres with the 26 acres that was a request that was made for that property, which is in the Goose Lake area. So we control about 242 acres in that acre. That will become what we call our third facility. We currently operate out of two major facilities. That area is designated to become our third facility, which will produce about 1.5 million tons of material every year. So we've offered to trade that parcel out of a suggestion for the mitigation of this, which would take a parcel offline for that mining activity and put it into conservation. So just as a background, that's kind of what this is about.
So when we looked at the ordinance, there are a number of criteria that we have to show that we've met in order to have the variance granted. It's outlined in our narrative attached to our petition. We believe that we've met all of the criteria. This particular parcel, just so you're aware, only affects the property that is our property on Thielen sand and gravel acreage. So it does not affect any adjoining property. So it is on our property, and that's where it would stay. In the grand scheme of the request, we believe that we met the ordinance intent in order to have an area that becomes stormwater management area, becomes additional recreational areas in the future. Now we also have Vince Mosca from Han Associates. Vince is able to answer any technical questions that you might have, but we do appreciate a positive vote today.
Okay, thank you. Does anyone have any questions for the petitioner?
I have a comment.
Yeah, go ahead, Joe.
I toured that facility with Chairman Bueller and Jeff Thorson last year, and I was amazed at how much effort is being put in to preserving the environment at that facility. Not only that, but even the washing area where the trucks drive through before they go out onto the roads. It cleans them off very well. They've got like a large concrete area with water running on it to clean the trucks off before they get out on the road. It's anyway, it seems like a very well-run organization from what I saw there, with very good concern for the environment and what they're doing.
Okay, thank you. Anyone else have anything? Carolyn Campbell?
Oh, no, you go ahead.
No, you go ahead. Well, I was going to ask the conservation. I know the conservation district was here, and I was wondering if they're here.
Well, that was
support or yeah.
Yeah, and we're gonna have. My intent would be we'd ask staff to come up and give us their interpretation of this, because there's some technical aspects I think that are difficult for all of us.
Yeah.
And then if the conservation district wants to weigh in, that's fine too. Do you want to stay up there? Joanna, please give us your interpretation and your feelings on this. And then I guess if you had any questions for them, they would be here to answer it in front of us.
We're happy to stand here, Joanna.
Yeah.
I won't take too long. Just in general, Adam kind of set the stage for why you're here. So they're asking for 4 specific requests of variance or relief from the Stormwater Management Ordinance. This is the Village of Lakemore, as you heard, but they are a non-certified community, so therefore our department takes care of their permits, variance requests, any other things associated with the Stormwater Management Ordinance for the village. The village did get their packet and were given the opportunity to come and share their discussion too, if so they chose. But in general, they're asking for 4 relief from 4 different ordinance provisions, and they're all related to that wetland mitigation. So as Dan and Mark had mentioned, there is an existing wetland on the site, 16.3 acres approximately, and the mining operation right now has stayed away from that because they didn't have permit before for that specific area. So now they're coming in with whether it's a new permit or a permit revision to the existing mining permit to actually mine that area. And as part of that, they're required to mitigate. It is an isolated wetland of McHenry County, so it's not jurisdictional. The Army Corps does not have jurisdiction over this, so that's why it falls to us to review and approve this portion of the permit. With respect to that, if you look at the ordinance standards, they're required to do 3-to-1 mitigation, so that's about 48, almost 49 acres if they so choose to purchase credits or do something off-site. It drops down to a 1-to-1 if they mitigate on-site, so approximately 16.3 acres is what they would be beholden to based on the ordinance standards to mitigate for that impact to the wetland. It is considered a high functional value wetland, so it is on both of our ADA maps and on the maps that are shown through the NRCS as a wetland in both of those cases. In this case, they're specifically requesting, again, the mitigation request or the variance for the mitigation. So although they are providing that 28.5 acres of mitigation on site, there are specific rules when you do provide mitigation. And that would be, 1, it has to stay open in perpetuity, and it has to be managed by a natural, let's say an agency that is well-versed in maintaining those open spaces, similar to the Conservation District, the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. The Village of Lakemore can do it as long as they have the means and opportunity to do that. They would also be required to put up some funding, like a letter of credit, to ensure that that open space stays open space, and there is some goals of management during the short-term and long-term operations of that. Once the mitigation is created, they're required to keep on it, whether it's annual or biannual inspections, some maintenance, and Vince, if you've got questions about that, Vince can kind of talk about that. But they are beholden to that to make sure that that wetland stays a wetland. And other than that, let's see, what was the other piece? So the hierarchy is what they're asking for. So again, for mitigation, they're required to either do it on-site or not required. But their request in our stormwater management ordinance or provisions say the best thing is to do it on-site. And then it goes down from there, saying, okay, adjacent site, an adjacent site, off-site, wetland bank, or nothing type of thing. So it goes from the best to the kind of not the best. And so they're asking again for relief from that component of the stormwater management ordinance. And that is about it. So again, jurisdictional determination. So what that is, again, is I need to do mitigation. I'm choosing to do mitigation on site. But again, we don't want to be beholden to all those rules that come with mitigation. Mitigation requirements, again, that's where the 3-to-1 or the 1-to-1 come in. Mitigation options, again, the on-site versus off-site, and then the hierarchy, again, on-site versus off-site. So those are the 4 variance requests they're coming from.
So do any of these 4 things they're offering, the parcel to Goose Lake, or at Goose Lake, the creation, I think it's being weird, of the new stormwater storage, is the wetlands shelves, the marsh enhancements, are any of that part of the 4896? Like, how much are they short of what they're supposed to be doing?
If they were to do the 1-to-1, if you look at the kind of the narrative on page 5 in your packet, I think, at the very bottom. So I went through the creation of the wetland shelves. Based on the ordinance standards, creation of a wetland does not get any credit. Because in most cases, it may be an upland area, you just don't have the opportunity or the understanding of, is this gonna stay a wetland because maybe the soils are bad, or maybe groundwater just isn't working out? So we, as a stormwater ordinance provision, say 0 credit for creation. You get a 1/4 acre creation for enhancement. So of those 16.3 acres, they would be at about just over 7 acres of wetland mitigation. So looking at 16 minus 7, you're looking at about 9 acres short. The Goose Lake property is in an upland area. There are some wetland pockets up there, but I don't think there's any wetlands on that site per se. In that case, again, it's an upland area. Even if they were to create, you wouldn't get credit for anything like that. It is in the same watershed, so that's a good thing. But that's what they're proposing on site would take up a portion of the mitigation.
Go ahead, Joe.
Because of the lakes that they are building, this isn't a flood problem. This is just simply a wetland mitigation problem. And I don't mean just, but it's,
Yes.
we're not comparing the two. This isn't, the fact that they gave us upland acreage in Goose Lake is great for the Goose Lake property, but it doesn't impact the neighbors or anything else. They're still gonna take care of all the water on site. In fact, they're taking care of extra water on site, correct?
That is correct.
So this is simply about the type of dirt that's being moved, not the type of flood problems or anything like that, correct?
They're not asking for relief from any of the flood hazard provisions of the stormwater management ordinance, or the runoff reduction, which is our detention or stormwater storage. So they're okay in that regard. It's strictly the wetlands component.
Paul?
I think you went next.
You don't?
Oh, go ahead.
Have the environmental groups weighed in on this particular project, giving feedback as to whether they support this endeavor?
I've not reached out. As far as our stormwater ordinance is concerned, and with respect to the provisions of the variance request, as Mark had mentioned, this is not required to go out to a public hearing because everything is impacted on site. So there is no trigger for
That
the
process.
correct.
But sometimes people become aware and then they make contact, you know, so I was just curious.
Yeah. As far as, obviously we reached out to Conservation District because they have a stake in us, the Village of Lakemore.
And the environmental defenders have not said anything.
I've not heard from them.
Okay, but before we're done, we're gonna hear from the Conservation District. I will ask that we hear from them anyway. I got a couple.
Oh, you
Go
know,
ahead,
you
Carol
know, you
Campbell.
know.
No, that's fine.
Oh, well, I was just wondering, so if the idea is that we're trying not to lose any more wetlands in the county, so, and clearly, we're only mitigating part of it, right? And I think the project looks great in terms of all the amenities and everything that's trying to happen there. But in a sense, we're trying to not have this net loss over time. So what is the consequence to you for not doing it, I guess? I know that there's more to be mined and there's an economic value to that, but,
I hear what you're saying.
Right.
So ultimately, because of the water levels and everything, when you look at this as a whole, as we continue to mine this parcel, for instance, we're 110 feet deep in this area here.
Yes.
What will happen is the water level that feeds this area, the 16.3, will drop and become constant across the entire site. And long-term, this will begin to dry and change its character. So whether, call it 15 years from now, this is still a designated wetland, is kind of, I guess you know better than me, I'm an accountant, but it would be more of that as time would go, the blunt answer is this will become much less of a wetland. And that's why we're kind of saying, well, if the preference is this parcel that has been suggested, then we're willing to make that trade. Here, if this, we have 35 years of reserves in this area, so we'll be here long enough that we believe eventually this will change its nature. It is already approved to be mined by the Village of Lakemore in our application, so it's a timing thing for us. Again, I think that answers your question.
And in essence, you know, not only are there minerals here, obviously on site at the Lakemore site, but there's also aggregate, you know, at the 26 acres that we're suggesting that we convey over to the conservation district. So there is value in both areas that we're trying to come up with this as a compromise to make it work for everybody.
So what I get out of this is if we don't do this 10 or 15 years down the road, you keep mining, this isn't going to be a wetland anyway.
It could.
It could or could not be,
Yeah,
but likely you're going to
yeah.
take enough gravel out of there, water level goes down.
Yeah.
And they would, by rights, they would be able to farm it.
Okay.
So,
But do
and for context, that wetland has been farmed within the last 20 years.
They just
So
would have
it
to
has
take a
been
rowboat out
abandoned
there with the
for
plow.
farming. But when Possum Run, when Meyer Materials still ran Possum Run, they had dewatered that pit, and which lowered the regional groundwater table here, and they were able to farm this. When Possum Run closed, the water level came back up. So it's a natural wetland under today's standards, but it's not always been, it's not a remnant natural area in the traditional sense.
Okay. Carolyn Schofield, did you have something?
Yeah, I did. I had a question because what Carolyn just said about, you know, the wetland, I guess it kind of contradicts with what Joe said is, you know, are we really trying to replace wetlands or are we just trying to make sure things aren't flooding? You know, and like wetlands are a way of, you know, naturally allowing for that and the cleaning of the contaminants and everything. But so this looks like it's still storing the flooding aspect of it, which a wetland would. So I guess are we really? I just think the stormwater ordinance isn't really looking necessarily for wetlands. I mean, this is unique in the sense of usually people are replacing wetlands with development, you know, so I think that you had mentioned that at the beginning, that it meets the intent of the ordinance, which it appears that it does. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that, Joanna? Does it?
So wetlands and floodplain are two mutually exclusive things when it comes to stormwater management ordinance. Obviously, there is some overlap with respect to if you have a wetland out in the field, it will store some water. So if it's a bowl, you know, there's got to have some type of volume that's going to be maintained in that area with respect to stormwater storage or floodplain. In the case of this wetlands, the stormwater storage and the benefits that they're doing with respect to the mine, so the volume of the mine, once it's all mined out in the reclamation plan, it's going to be a big basin or a pond or a lake. So the benefit of the stormwater storage that you would get in that 16-acre pocket is way increased with the incorporation of that new pond or that new lake that Thielen will be adding as part of their final reclamation plan. So that's why I said it's not necessarily a stormwater storage issue or a floodplain issue at this point, because that volume has already been totally exceeded with the final plan of Thielen with respect to their reclamation plan.
And if I might add, I mean, we're asking for a variance because this doesn't meet your ordinances. I mean, so that's why we're here. I mean, part of, when you talk about water quality, if you've seen Lily Lake and seen its condition, this is a small drainage ditch that comes in and makes its way out to the Fox. So when this plan is complete, ultimately we will bring that discharge into our lake system and dilute it and allow this lake actually will become more healthier because it's going to have a little bit of contaminants in it where it's not crystal clear like
nutrients.
Not nutrients.
As
I said,
So says the expert.
I have to stop talking. But before it discharges out, it'll become a different quality before it hits the Fox. Okay, so that's, you know, I'd add that to that.
Well, and I guess that's to my point is, it seems like a win-win. And correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems like we're getting the wetlands and we're accomplishing what the ordinance really wants to accomplish at the same time.
That's for you guys to decide, but
I would appreciate an input because you're the expert in it and they're the experts in it and we're, let's all be honest here. I mean, I have a degree in at environmental engineering and still is way above, my head, and so I just, yeah.
Don't sell yourself short.
Yeah.
But with respect to that, so what the ordinance looks at is what's the quality of that wetland? What are we losing in the grand scheme of all the wetlands or this specific wetland? So in this case, it's got a high functional value. Vince and his team went out and analyzed that wetland. It's got a high, it's called an FQI or Floristic Quality Index. So that means that there's a lot more vegetation that isn't just cattails and willows and the invasive stuff. It's got some good value with respect to vegetation. It's pretty diverse. With respect to that, maybe those wetland areas that they are proposing could be similar to those characteristics over on the east side of Lily Lake, but we don't have a plan for that yet. We don't know what they're going to propose because again, this is part of the whole process of the permitting. They're coming in for that specific request of mitigation and not having to do that. Not to say that they won't provide a nice quality wetland over here. They just don't. They don't want all four of these rules them to be beholden to those rules for the next 40 years until the reclamation plan is done and the long-term management aspect after that. So Dan said they're going to be out here 35 years. So in the meantime, they'll be maintaining this area, but the long-term benefits and the long-term management of it, who's going to take that over? Whose responsibility is that? And that's specific to their request for the variance.
But isn't that where the conservation district comes in?
That's up to them. So as far as if they choose to continue with that mitigation on site and say that those 7 or the 20-some acres, which then gets down to the 7 acres of mitigation, if they choose to go through and say, all right, well, we will mitigate on site and we will have somebody with natural experience maintain this in perpetuity and have a deed restriction over this, then by all means, we'll continue that process with respect to the permitting. But if you grant that variance for 0 mitigation, then that component goes away. That requirement goes away, not that component. But does that make sense?
Well, not really from the standpoint, I mean, it appears that it's in here. To me, it looks like, the conservation conservation district's mentioned in here.
The conservation district component of it is, again, that land swap of the 28 acres.
Right.
There are no wetlands on that site. It is just an upland area. So with respect to, we're doing some great things across the county, that 28 acres will stay in open space in perpetuity, but it's not going to swap out for a wetland. It doesn't get credit for mitigation because it's an upland area.
So it's not a wetland that
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, that is upland area.
Okay. It's just acreage, it's not wetland. Okay, I misunderstood that at the beginning. All right, I'm good.
Just for clarification too, the McHenry County Wetland Inventory calls this wetland a high functional value wetland, not a high habitat value. So in the ordinance, it's you have a normal wetland, high functional value, which is for stormwater and water quality, and then there's the high habitat. So Blanding's turtles, yellow-headed blackbird, kind of, that's the highest 6-to-1 ratio. So this one wasn't for habitat value, it's for function for stormwater and water quality.
Which is what it's still going to do.
Right, so the site will, in tenfold increase in flood storage, and then with the improvements on lengthening the flow path of the Lily Lake drain, those functions, without overstating it, will be definitely replaced and enhanced significantly. So just because when you hear high habitat or high quality, you think of fens and stuff like that, and that's not what we have here.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
So there's no, you're saying there's not really the habitat there, so have you done when you were out there? Like, are there Blanding's turtles there? Are there?
There are Blanding's turtle in the neighborhood, but never confirmed here.
Okay. And
The
so
best way to say it, because when we went through zoning several years ago, there were records up in the neighborhood, I believe,
Right.
but not on site.
And you're saying that's not an original wetlands, it's not a remnant, it's been created because.
Well, it was a wetland 100 years ago,
Okay.
and then it was farmed for a long time, and now it's reverted. So it's naturalized again, so it wasn't created in the vernacular of the ordinance created, but it has been abandoned from farming.
But it was originally a wetlands.
Yes,
Like
it's a
before,
peat bowl,
Yeah.
a muck,
Yeah, right.
organic soil.
So,
1945, they used to store all of their silts. This has been mined in this area since the 30s.
mhm.
So they had a silt pond there. The dam broke and flooded the 16.3 acre zone, which created this top layer of a very heavy silty project, and it just evolved over time.
And so were you saying that there's potential for some like mitigation on the other side of the lake when everything is done?
They are
potentially?
proposing that as part of their reclamation plan. So if you see those blue zones,
Yeah.
Vince, if you want to point those out. So
Over
there's a
there.
marsh
Okay, right,
enhancement
okay.
right there. And
For some
then
reason I thought
There's
it was
three others.
Right.
Yeah.
This is a heavily tiled old sod farm
Okay.
that is now it's too wet, if you will. But it's also mostly reed canary grass and glossy buckthorn and now common reed coming in. So we had proposed as on their way out of town a few decades from now of enhancing this wetland by making pockets in it for marsh birds and then northern pike spawning habitat. Because under current conditions, it's not achieving its fullest potential. So by putting shallow scrapes and then connections with the other water bodies, we believe it'll function much better.
And then this 17 acres actually will be harvested and help to create these small functional wetland beds, again, to make a healthier lake, according to Vince. This would be, we just relocate those to help that stabilization process begin.
And the philosophy is that the gravel pits of the old days are underachieving because they have no nutrition left. They're all just sand and gravel shorelines and not much shallow water. So Three Oaks, without picking on anybody in particular, there's not a lot of shallow water there, and the fish are hungry because there's not a lot of plants to grow bugs for little fish and bigger fish, etc. So one of the things that we've been encouraging these guys is to do some riparian wetlands and some other shallow water areas to make everything function better. And the Lily Lake drain, to Dan's point, there is a small watershed up in here, but it does bring some stuff in here. So one of the things about these pits is that they don't have enough, believe it or not, nitrogen and phosphorus coming to them. So they're hungry, starving from a nutrient standpoint. So the Lily Lake drain will actually help this system in a small sense of kind of fertilizing the lake in a weird sense.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Joanna. I think we're good on that part. I would like to see if the Conservation District would like to weigh in on this. Elizabeth, would you, or?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, thank you. Elizabeth Kessler, Executive Director for the Conservation District, and Ben Collins, who's our Director of Land Preservation and Natural Resources. So I just want to speak about a couple different things about from the district's perspective, and then I'll let Ed talk about the Goose Lake project and the work that's been going on down there. So first and foremost, the Conservation District is not a regulatory agency, and so in essence, a feedback of how that would be not our particular role. And we also are not an adjoining property owner into this parcel. So we do have a public process where, should we get notification of sorts, we'll respond to activity of sorts, but it doesn't fit into that area. So from that perspective, I won't weigh on that, but I'll talk about the conservation impact to Goose Lake. And then the only other thing I would say, just in general, Blandings was mentioned. We do believe potentially, just based on the area, the district is willing to obviously trap and relocate and go. We have a very extensive Blanding Turtles program to where we've had very successful efforts in their success rates throughout other places in the county. Just like
So I will talk briefly about the Goose Lake site. If you're not familiar with it, it's located just a little bit east of the town of Hebron. It's an old geologic kettle, so when the ice melted, it created a basin there. Conservation District has been purchasing land there since we got a donation of the initial 30 acres in the 1980s, and we've completed restoration on all the wetland portions. The last portion we felt from the county stormwater ordinance. It's a very rich site in terms of the number of endangered wetland birds and other avifauna that actually live on the site. So it's very high quality at this point due to the restoration process. And in fact, of such high quality that it's actually, it is a state land and water reserve. So it's registered with the state because of its high quality and its number of endangered species. The Hebron Trail extension, multiple use extension, goes through the site on the north end, so bike users and hikers are able to take a look at that site from a viewing platform and see a lot of these birds. The area that's in question is the possible donation has actually been identified by the district for many years as the last piece of that particular site. And I'll say something here related to wetlands. There are no wetlands on that site. But just as you heard the conversation about lowering the water table and losing some of the wetland functions in this wetland, it works in the opposite direction at Goose Lake. Goose Lake is groundwater fed in many of its aspects, and preserving that last piece of the surrounding uplands means that in the long run for Goose Lake, as gravel mining happens beyond it, we're preserving groundwater recharge for the natural area of the lake. So there are some wetland benefits, not direct but indirect, in terms of how the water budget for that particular site is arranged. We will restore it to uplands, and the only other comment that I will make about the wetland-upland interface is that there's a lot of action that happens in the wetlands. It's a very cool place. Not been up there, take your bike, take a walk, take a lunch, and sit on the viewing platform and spend a couple hours there. But also, many of the animals that live in the wetland community depend on the uplands around it. So we use Blanding's turtles and mallard ducks as two examples. Blanding's turtles will spend most of their life in the wetland. But when the time comes to make new Blanding's turtles, they will go up to the uplands, and they like sand and gravel to nest in. So this will provide habitat for Blanding's turtles, which we habitat site for their nesting. Mallard ducks we all see out in the wetlands, but when it comes to nesting, the females are in the upland portion. So these two types of communities work very closely together. And so that is the Conservation District interested in completing that site, because it does provide the last piece of upland buffer that we need there. And I'll be happy to talk about wetlands all day long.
Well, thank you. Go ahead, Teresa, if you have a question.
How close is the Gooseland area to this site? Is it on here? Can I see, is Gooseland on here or no?
I don't believe it's on there.
It's 10 miles away.
10 miles away.
By 15. Go ahead, Jenna.
10 miles is the Sand Hill Crane Flies.
That's correct. 10 miles is the crane flies.
Okay.
And many, many miles as the turtle walks.
This is down by Lake in the Hills operation.
Right.
It's up by
No,
Hebron.
this is
Hebron,
by
up by
Lakemore.
Hebron. Okay,
Lakemore.
thank you.
Lakemore.
Lakemore, Lang
Not
Road,
Lakemore.
I don't go down there. Too many stoplights.
So the land you're donating is over by Hebron,
Correct.
which will help this then?
Yes,
So-
part of that assemblage.
It's up in my
Oh, okay.
territory, and it is a fabulous wetland area.
If
It
you look
is.
at your
I've been
comments
to
on
the
page
viewing
15
station.
is the
It's-
actual
it's good.
Goose Lake
Oh, okay.
piece that they're looking at relative to their existing holdings.
And that is for Habitat for Ag.
For the national wildlife.
Wildlife refuge, yeah.
Right about where the Illinois is, just above that, is on about 173 east of Hebron there.
Yeah.
Yeah, Lang Road there.
Yeah, a little to the left,
It is
my left,
right there.
right there. that
That's
big-
Gooseland. Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the 26 acres is up in the corner to the northeast, I believe, of there.
So I'm gonna zoom in a little bit, so again, here's, over here, you've got Hebron. Got Spring Grove over here, Richmond. And then we are down. So, here's where that wetland is, right from.
Oh, okay.
I'll zoom out a little bit so you guys can see. Kind of by the 120 down here, the site. Top of 173 up here. This is lots.
Can I ask one more question?
Sure.
Joanna? So they have these proposals in here, so is what you're saying is that their proposals are not necessarily within the variation process? Or is it in there? Is that where you're?
It is additional information for you as background of kind of giving you a perspective of what the variance is about, what they're asking for specifically, and what their trade-off is.
I mean, if we approve the variations, are those automatically transferred into that variation?
Not unless you want them to be. Because
Like
right
this
now-
26 acre in particular? Is
That,
that in there?
I will leave that up to Mark as well, and Dan.
It is our variance request, because we're asking that we not have these mitigation requirements.
That's
This
the one
is
you're
in
proposing.
lieu of that.
Yeah.
And we're, yeah, if you
We
make a
would
motion
need
to
that.
that effect, that's absolutely what we would agree to.
Okay,
Yes.
and that's what, yeah, okay. Because I like it. I mean, I think it is going back to a win-win for everybody on that one, so, and I think it meets the intent of the ordinance, my personal opinion, but, I mean, I would like to make sure that what's proposed is what is implemented.
Okay. And maybe this will be back for Joanna. We have, if the variance is granted, the recommendation contain the following conditions. There's a couple conditions there. Do we, if we vote on this, do we need to add those conditions
Yes.
as part of it?
It is up to you. That's kind of staff's recommendations there, just to make sure that if things do go and the variance is granted, so those are our recommendations. You could take it or leave it, just like any other variance request that comes through
Just-
anybody.
Okay, thank you. Does the petitioner have?
Yeah, I don't think we've seen those
Yeah.
conditions, sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay, let me read them to you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Alright.
What page are you on?
With respect to if the variance is granted by the PED, staff recommendation is the variance contain the following conditions. Any modification to the reclamation plan shall be reviewed and approved by the McHenry County Department of Planning and Development, Water Resources Division, to ensure the revisions comply with the approved SMO variance 2201, which is this one, and intent of the variance.
Okay, can we do one at a time so I make sure I understand?
Is that in the packet? I mean, what page?
Yes,
are you on?
it's page 7.
5?
7.
7.
Yeah.
So,
Thank you.
so what is being proposed
Thank you.
here is, as simple as I can state it, is a swap for 16.32 acres for 26.4 acres. That's what is being proposed with no assertions. This, here, we work with the village of Lakemore and we work with McHenry Storm as they are uncertified. They require us to work with the McHenry County Stormwater Department. So I'm working with two different agencies. I have the Village of Lakemore, I have McHenry County Stormwater right now. That is not to say in the future, Lakemore may say, we're gonna do our own stormwater management and hire their own person. So what I wanna make sure I understand is if they continue to use McHenry, that it's a non-issue because we have to anyway, right? But if they do not use McHenry County, we have to satisfy McHenry County stormwater to what aspect?
So with respect to the permit, you have a permit for your site.
Right.
So any change to that permit, you would want to make sure that we see it and approve it relative to what has been approved here with the variance request.
So as long as you are in charge of that, we have no problems, correct?
Fair enough.
And so that is, we are required to do that today, and we'd be fine with that. Going into the future, 20 years from now, with what Lakemore might want to ask us to do versus this, we would not be. So as long as you're in charge, we're fine with that. But if Lakemore decides to do it themselves, we have to comply with their desires.
Right.
Okay.
Well, that would make sense, and you wouldn't be here anyway, because you'd be dealing with them.
Right.
You're not
So-
specifying what
Well,
body.
but it's not a bad idea to
Yes.
clarify
So
that
the
you
community,
go to one
if-
agency.
Right.
If Lakemore
Not to two.
becomes certified, you would continue to work with them.
Correct. We'd have to, yes.
Yeah, and then the second condition, I think we need to reword a little bit
Sure.
to, it's
Okay.
not necessarily on-site mitigation areas, but
So I would propose, since the word mitigation has a lot of conditions to it in the ordinance, as you mentioned, I think we'd agree to something more like the proposed on-site marsh and wetland enhancement areas would replace lost functional values of the be impacted by something like that. So that's a little bit less, because the word mitigation would bring in all of those things, like the shelves wouldn't be mitigation, because they're not allowed to be, but they would be an enhancement. So if we could say something, to take the word mitigation out, but tie it to an implementation of something that looks like this, but doesn't have the specific criteria to it.
So he's referring to the second provision, or the second
Condition.
condition, thank you, proposed conditions. As it's written in your packet, it says on-site mitigation areas, wetland shelf and marsh enhancement areas, so there's three little pockets and then that large enhancement area, shall meet or exceed the wetland quality of the impacted 16.32 acre wetland on-site. So in that regard, so that's where Vince is coming in. It's not necessarily mitigation, it's more the proposed on-site wetland shelf and marsh enhancement areas shall
replace lost functional values of the impacted wetland.
So if we reword that second condition, you guys are acceptable to having those conditions included?
On the fly, I think it's okay.
Yeah,
Because I think
as long as we're saying we're just replacing that, is fine. And again, as long as really, number one is you don't even need it, because as long as you're there, you're in charge.
Yeah.
When you're not in charge, I can't be accountable to you.
Absolutely. I think we're all working towards the same thing here, just getting the wording correct that is comfortable for you, and yet us, we're not putting ourselves in out there with some kind of future consequence that we don't want to get ourselves into, kind of thing. So, Carolyn, go ahead.
Yeah, I just feel like that second one, you know, if we leave the first one in place and it's being turned over to the conservation district, I just don't see the need for that second one, I guess, because it's like Ed was saying, you know, you're not comparing a wetland to an upland, and I just don't see how you can compare the quality and, you know.
I'm not asking for the Goose Lake piece, I'm asking for the marsh enhancements
Right.
and the wetland shelves that are on site. So they're, as part of their overall reclamation
You said that,
plan.
and you said that it already did that.
Okay, well, but again, all this has to be approved by Lakemore.
Yeah.
So far, the only thing we're arguing about is this road. So if Lakemore does not approve this, I can't build this. So in all honesty, I'm really saying I have 16.32 wetland acres that I'm willing to give 26, for this step, 26 acres. Because I am not in complete control of my ability to do this without Lakemore. On both of those items, Lakemore is a participant. So I'd actually ask for both of them to be stricken.
Can I just ask for clarification
Sure.
then? So what are you saying that they might not want the marsh enhancement shelves?
Well, for instance, let's take this. You know, there's a desire they want to have it more active than passive. So I don't know how you can take a wetland area and make it more active than what it is today. It's just, I cannot control all of my conversations with the village of Lakemore on what their desires are. I can make pretty pictures and do all of this and talk to you about it, but I can't control ultimately what they want. And again, this is a reclamation plan, and as time goes along, you know, they want Lily Lake cleaned up, so they're asking us to dredge Lily Lake. Well, you know, they may come in and say, well, if you're gonna dredge Lily Lake, we want all of that fill material here, and it becomes bigger, you know. So I think this started, just to kind of go back in a little history, it's really, the point we're at today is we have this wetland area, we'd like to donate the 26 acres in exchange for this. As we proceed in a lot of getting this finalized, Joanna will be involved in that process because she has to approve, like we're opening up, we're creating a pretty big stormwater approval process. The Army Corps of Engineers have already been out and approved this cut, but now I have to do all my stormwater ordinance compliance features to do all that. So she'll get lots of swings at us during this process at a later time. And I think, you know, 35 years is a long time. And as we begin to create these, if if somebody at Lakemore says we don't want it here because it's too close to the road and it goes over here and it ends up to be 3 acres. I mean, I'm out of control of that, somewhat of that process. That's what I'm saying. This is what we've proposed to them. This is the direction they're headed. 30 years from now, and during that 30 years, I'm not sure what happens.
So is there no way to get them to buy into it now?
To buy into it?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so at what point do we make an agreement that we don't know that it could be held up 35 years from now? I'm just saying that it's part of the appeal, and I get that the whole donation of the lake is fabulous, and I think that's, I know the conservation just don't like that, but part of the appeal is having these shelves and some of the other attributes that you're putting into it. And so the idea that the potential that they wouldn't exist at all, where's the input from Lakemore now?
Go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead.
Well, what I would say is we have somewhat of a moving target, and you have that on every one of these.
Yeah.
I mean, this is 35 years from now. Candidly, that puts me at 100. I don't think I will be here. But I do believe that what they're proposing today makes sense. I think they're being candid with us to say, guys, as all projects, if you go 35 years before us, this is a very different site. It's going to come back here to this board or Lakemore, depending who's in charge at that point in time. I don't know when Lakemore will become a certified town, if they'll ever become a certified town. They could have already done it, or they could never do it. But if they do, that's going to be who's making this call. Right now, we have to make the call for today and what we're proposing today. I like what I see. Can I guarantee that 35 years from now it will be exactly as I see? No, but I don't think any of us can do that. But I do think what they're proposing is a good trade for the county. And I go back even 15 years, this wouldn't even been a discussion. They would have mined this out, and that would have been the end of the discussion.
I agree with you.
And so, the fact that the conservation district gets to fill in that last piece is helpful. In addition to that, there's still going to be reviews in the future.
And I'll point out, we just celebrated our 75th anniversary. We're going to be around another 50 to 75 years. So where this property,
Now you're to the left. There were the big.
so we can bring it down just a little bit right here. Okay, so this is the 26. We own up in here 265 additional acres that we intend on mining. We are mining some, and we'll be coming back to the county every 10 years for that. So the moment you say, Mr. Shepherd, we haven't seen any of that activity, the moment I stop mining with approvals from McHenry County. So we'll be here. We have been for a long time. And in your last bat at me, this will not be the last bat. You'll see me for maybe not another 35, I'll be 96, but at least another 10. So anyway, but go ahead.
No, that's good. Thank you. I'll go back to the conditions, I guess. And I understand what you're saying about at some point down the road, you don't know who you're going to be talking to for control of that situation. The first condition, it seems like you were okay with the first condition.
So as long as, my edit to that, as long as you are the responsible entity, I'm more than fine. When Lakemore becomes certified, you're no longer the responsible entity. Lakemore is the responsible entity.
I think the condition essentially, it doesn't have to say that to be that. Is that the correct way to put it?
I would add something to the end. I wrote down, I jotted down, if Lakemore continues to be a non-certified community.
Which is fine.
That would be fine.
Okay.
That would work.
Let's just try to clarify this language so when we vote, we're all in agreement on what we're voting on and how we're going to proceed. So there's no confusion for you guys too.
Yeah, I'm fine with that.
Yeah. Okay.
And on the mitigation areas on item 2, they're just saying the wetland shelf and marsh enhancement areas shall meet or exceed the wetland quality of the impacted. I mean, if you take out the word mitigation, I think you're right there.
Actually, I'd ask for it to be stricken.
I have no
Otherwise, then we gotta put in language about, you know, reasonably cooperating with the village of Lakemore, but that doesn't do really anybody any good.
No.
Because we don't know what could happen.
I think Joanna's language in the first part, I see this as being pretty collaborative and a good project, and it's really that you guys brought it forward like this, and we have everyone here in agreement, I think, on how to move forward with it. Carolyn Campbell, go ahead.
Yeah, I just think, Joanna was gonna jump in, and I was kinda curious as to what you're gonna say.
No, I was just gonna say, I tweaked it, the verbiage a little bit based on Vince's comments, but if it's up to you to strike it.
No, I like
that's
the
fine,
tweaked
too.
verbiage, and I think that is more satisfying to the petitioner. Would you want to repeat it one more time, make
Okay.
sure?
So the first condition would be any modifications to the reclamation plan shall be reviewed and approved by the McHenry County Department of Planning and Development, Water Resources Division, to ensure the revisions comply with the approved SMO variance 2201 and the intent of the variance if Lakemore continues to be a non-certified community. And then the second one, if you so choose, I tweaked that a little bit based on Vince's comments. The proposed on-site wetland shelf and marsh enhancement areas shall replace the functional value of the impacted 16.32 acre wetland.
So just to be clear, so that's basically whatever we create in these wetland shelves just has to add up to 16.3?
No, a functional value. So in that case, it could be vegetation, it could be water quality, it could be stormwater storage. You're not gonna get much stormwater storage out of the wetland shelves, just
Right.
for the nature of them, but that's the intent.
Okay.
It does not give a acreage, it does not give a
Then says I'm okay.
FQI. Okay.
So we have an agreement between the environmentalist, the lawyer, and the owner. If we word that second.
The accountant, the lawyer, and the environmentalist. What's wrong with this group?
Yeah.
If
They're all in a
we,
boat together, too.
if we reword that second condition, I see in a head shake, okay, on that too, which seems to make sense. Is there any more questions from the committee for anybody, or anything we need to clarify? Go ahead, Joe.
I would just make a point for the board, for the committee to understand. What's unique about this is you are acting, or we are acting as the judge and jury on this. So when we make this decision, it's one of the few times it's a final decision. It doesn't go to the full board. I'm in favor of doing this. It stops here. Okay?
I didn't
So,
know that.
so I just wanted you to be aware of that, because I don't think, I mean, it's the first time, at least since I've been up here, and that's almost 10 years, that we've actually made a decision that stops here.
Oh, really?
So,
Our variances are very few and far between.
yeah.
Yeah, but,
And
with
I'm
that-
fine with that, but I just thought we should be aware of that when we're voting on it.
And
That's
it's
all.
fine that you brought that up, not that it's a negative comment in any way.
No, I'm in
It is-
favor of doing this, and I
I'm in
plan on
favor of
voting
doing
in
it, and
favor of
I'm-
it, but I do think we should understand
No, I think
what we're
that's-
voting on.
Thank you, that's a very good
Right.
point.
And I have no problem that it stops here and that we're gonna vote on it, because I think we've had a very clear conversation about this project, and I think it was presented to us very well by all parties involved, so. Unless there's something else, I would say we could go to vote.
I think we have to make a motion, right?
Yep.
I would make a motion to approve the variations as written. I don't want to read them all off of my phone at the moment. Along with the two conditions staff gave as modified in our discussions here.
I second.
Both conditions.
Both conditions, but as modified,
As
not
modified.
as originally presented.
Okay, motion by Mr. Godwin, seconded by Paula Jensen.
I will get the language to Kathy so that she can.
Yes,
Yes.
please. Okay, and is there any other discussion on the motion that's on the table? Okay, we'll go to vote. Paula?
Yes.
Michelle?
Yes.
Jeff?
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Carolyn Campbell?
Yes.
Joe?
Yes,
Teresa?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes.
thank you.
very much. Appreciate your consideration.
Thank you for the very
And
specific and detailed presentation.
Can I just say thank you to Conservation District also for coming and for
Yes.
The only thing, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, we did the Unified Development Ordinance stuff, that's gonna move forward. We're going to number 6, presentation, ancillary dwelling unit discussion. Adam's gonna lead us on that discussion.
Surely. So we've had a couple of weeks, I apologize, my computer is dying, so I'm coming, opening up, stole Joanna's package. We've had a couple months where we've had public comment regarding ancillary dwelling units. Wanted to bring it into the discussion for the committee themselves to address it, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I want to give you a little history on it. Going back to about 2008 to 2018, there were no ancillary dwelling units that were approved through the county board. Historically, there's been 15 that have been approved. Going back to 51, if I'm not mistaken. So, long time. Since then, in 2018, there was a push nationally, locally, and it was investigated. It was looked at and brought forward as a potential amendment to curtail to a couple of requests that were through for second dwellings, and meet some conceptual needs of the community, which would be aging in place, secondary living in the event that something like 2008 comes about, and there's an umbrella for somebody for families to cohabitate. Since then, we have issued multiple ancillary dwelling unit permits, previous to them being allowed by right. We would receive applications for single-family residences that would try go out of their way to skirt the issue, with connecting hallways without doors. That potentially after construction they would then be outfitted with doors that would be locked, and now you have a duplex. And so this ancillary dwelling unit process, or this permit, was a way to draw those out and have an open, honest conversation with folks that were intending to do stuff like that. Since then, and really until August, we really haven't had much in the way of negative feedback, conversations, or discussions that have pushed it towards that way. And like I said, the public comment that has come forward, we wanted to bring it up for discussion and see if this committee had any feedback, questions, or anything in particular they'd like to discuss on that topic, ancillary dwelling units.
Okay, thank you. Does the committee have, go ahead, Jeff.
So the possible discussion points that were presented to us, members here.
Sure.
By the gentleman here. He's got several proposals there. 1A, 2A, 2B. So what are the, what is your feedback on these proposals?
Sure.
And does that tie into what we're?
Some of them do, Jeff. Some of them do, but others don't. When it comes to ancillary dwelling units, the particular issue that's raised here is that it goes against the covenants of the subdivision.
Right.
There's a lot of subdivisions in the county. All of them have a covenant to one degree or another. The county does not enforce, does not track. They're not part of the codes. When subdivisions come through, they'll submit covenants to the county to verify that they are at least compliant with the UDO, with other, so that they're not in conflict. And then they can raise the rates at that point. One of the reasons that the county's not involved with those is that we're not party to those contracts, if you will. It's between the association and that individual property owner. For a similar concept to that, we don't own any infrastructure out there. The on-site well, the septic, a stormwater management system, that's all privately owned at that point. So the county really has no dog in the fight. On top of that, there's so many subdivisions that have these covenants that maybe the HOAs are not together anymore, they were defunct. And whether they are, whether they aren't, it's just something that the county would not have the resources to track, to enforce, if they do amend it, to meet their meeting dates. We do enforcement, we do building permits, but not enforcement for Trout Valley. One of their processes is to go in front of their homeowners association for an architectural review. We're contracted, Rob, we have an intergovernmental agreement, and I can tell you, not intentionally, but with surety, that we have fallen on that. We've tripped up their process. So it's even when we have the IGA, there's some issues that come about because it's just not part of our typical process. And we correct them. We go through great lengths. We'll go public and say, hey, listen, this is our mistake. We'll guide you through it the rest of the way. That would be the adventure here, but multiply that by hundreds, if not multiple dozens. That's for the ancillary dwelling units. For some of the other components that are discussed in the letter, they are civil matters. There's some items that, whether it's drainage, stormwater components, they're reflected in the covenants, and that would be enforceable through an attorney. And I recognize the position, but it's that unfortunately is the answer to multiple items within that.
But wasn't there something done in the very beginning that took away the right or something with respect to the?
Sure. So the ancillary dwelling units becoming a permitted use by right, that previously would have gone through a conditional use process, and there would have been a hearing, there would have been notices given to the adjacent property owners. And in this case, it would have gone to the gentleman in question.
So why did we get away from that, or what's the advantage of not having that?
I lean a little bit perhaps on zoning and the history, but Joe,
I can tell you some of that. I was here when that happened. So first off, what used to happen, he mentioned it a little bit about the hallways with the no doors, okay? On a 3-acre site, if you wanted to expand your house and build this as an addition to your house, you absolutely could do that without talking to anybody other than the building department. And so what would happen is you'd see these where they were building the mother-in-law's place or whatever you want to call it, the granny pad, and they would just build it out. They would take it over the tops of their garage or something and build a story on top of their garage, and it didn't come to anybody for that, all right? Now, you could also ask for a separate dwelling unit, and a lot of farmers over the years on large parcels of land said, I wanted a spot for my kids or something else so they could keep on farming. That was a pretty common practice. And it's not the same thing as a granny pad, but what finally came up then, 4 years ago, was the proposal that there's a lot of parcels that have the space, rather than pretending to have a long hallway between the two of them, let's just call it what it is and let them have that second unit. Now, that doesn't change the local covenants, all right? The local covenants are a completely separate item, and they are enforcement for the last century since the covenants that I know of have always been by the people that have the right to enforce them are the neighbors around you. So for instance, if you move into a subdivision and it says, that you can't have this second dwelling unit on your property, that is for you to enforce as somebody in your neighborhood. But if you don't enforce it, nobody else is going to. Right? Now that can go to building lines. I mean, I've been in a lawsuit for 2 years between two people that most of the people in this room know about whether or not somebody's house that was built in 1930, 1 year after the covenant was put in, is in front of the line or not. But the two neighbors are fighting over it. The tragedy is they've known each other for 70 years, and they're fighting over it now. But that's what happens with covenants. And, you know, if you go back even further, there's some pretty horrible things were in covenants, and those are considered unenforceable now thanks to the U.S. Congress. But they had all kinds of things in covenants. We didn't enforce them. Some of the things, you know, if you want to go back to conditional uses, we can do that. We could certainly go back and say, do you want to have a conditional use to require this? You'd be able to have more restrictions on it, and, you know, but do we want, you know, the flip side of it is, do you want government that deeply involved in something that you can be avoided by building a hallway? You know, and we thought 4 years ago that wasn't the kind of concern that we wanted the board in. It did not change these covenants. We've never changed their covenants. That's up to them to decide. As far as having the right to a hearing as to what your building permit you're going to do on your property, I don't think any of us want to have to apply to our neighbors for building permits. I mean, I wouldn't do that. I mean, you know, that's not something we've ever done. You get neighborhood notice for changes in the zoning ordinance. You get neighborhood notice for changes and a conditional use is a change in the zoning ordinance. But you do not get notified if your neighbor's building a swimming pool. I mean, and I don't know anywhere in, you know, Illinois that you would get notified if their neighbor was doing that. Yes.
Good, Paul.
I'm confused, which is normal, but I get the idea this gentleman wants us to regulate HOAs. Am I correct by this material that
To act
he
as the
would like
enforcing
us?
body for
Huh?
it. It would appear to act as the enforcement leg or branch for.
Right. And I'll be very frank, I don't think that's our responsibility to regulate HOAs in the county in unincorporated areas. I think that would become unwieldy and difficult to enforce. And I'm not an expert on this, but it's kind of embedded in here and implied in his narrative, but the kernel to me is the HOA. And he talks about his right and also that his voice needs to be respected, but my question is he going through the HOA? Is he working with the HOA about some of these concerns?
They don't have, it's not been incorporated. I'm sorry to intervene. It has not been incorporated in his neighborhood. They've got the covenants, but they don't have an active HOA.
Oh, it's inactive.
That's correct.
But does that change it for, does that change the focus about our involvement? If they have an inactive HOA and he wants, my understanding, to get involved in some of these issues that are not being resolved because of the inactive HOA, does that legally
I don't know
come
that
back to
answer.
us?
I don't know that answer.
Can I just ask a question, or clarify, maybe clarify something, I don't know. So when I'm reading it, maybe I missed something, but I wasn't so much under the impression that it was to enforce the HOA, but at least let somebody who's coming in and requesting that building permit to be made aware of it, because there's no notification to neighbors that this is happening. So by the time a neighbor finds out that their neighbor's in violation of an HOA requirement, or their covenant requirement, it's too late, or now it's a much bigger deal. So it's more, is there a process? So because assuming that this dwelling had to go before building though, in order to make sure everything, it complied with, stormwater, whatever, right?
Yeah, it complies with the ordinances.
Okay, so the question then is more, I don't know if it's, and maybe I'm wrong, but I wasn't getting it that we were to enforce the HOA, but in some way make sure that people are aware that they exist before they go and get a building permit. And further, I wasn't, maybe I'm wrong on this too, but I wasn't getting the impression that just because the HOA itself is not active, the covenant would still be enforceable by law.
They're enforceable by any individual in that subdivision.
Correct. But if they don't know that there is some building going on, then they wouldn't know it until it's already kind of beyond, you know, now this.
I agree, but that's, again, I don't disagree that they wouldn't necessarily know about a building permit. But if these people had built a hallway between these two structures, they wouldn't have known about it either.
That's true.
I guess the other thing I would say is when you buy a property, I was under the impression that the real estate agent in the process legally had to tell the new homeowners about any restrictions. So, this is not part of this experience, but in a personal experience, I know somebody who purposely went against their HOA requirements and knew they were doing it, and then were upset when they got called on it. I mean, it's when you break a rule, you know the consequence of having to pull that building down or the lost cost is that's the fault of the person who knowingly went against the rules that they knew were set. So,
if you don't use an attorney during your closing, nobody's going to tell you that there's covenants recorded on the property from 1950. People are surprised to find that out every day.
Okay.
And many people, the number of people that close without a plat of survey is very surprising to me as well. So,
but I asked on a different note that I was going to ask. So one of the things I find in this specific case that brought to our attention that we need to discuss this was that the accusation is that building all this, the pool and building the new property has created a stormwater issue that is flooding the neighbors.
That's right.
When we do our stormwater permitting, when we do permitting that's going to affect the stormwater, are we including an area that can't be built on as part of the surface that's penetrable? Because I would think maybe we should rethink that we should say that if you're, like I live on what's essentially a marsh. And I don't think that if I was going to rebuild, people should consider that marsh part as buildable land. It's absolutely not buildable land. And if I try to build too close into it, I will flood my neighbors.
Sure. Yes. You want me to?
Sure. Yes.
So there's two components. And Renee can talk about like the SARA, the sensitive aquifer recharge area.
Yeah.
That 50%. But in the case of just because you're allowed to put 50% doesn't necessarily mean it will meet the stormwater management ordinance regulations or the zoning regulations.
Yeah.
So there's always that give and take. So just because you can doesn't mean you will be able to.
Yeah.
So with respect to this one, they actually went above and beyond. And they had an engineer provide stormwater calculations for the depression behind his house.
Okay.
And determine a high water elevation. And the property or the structure is out of that zone, out of the flood zone, and it meets the ordinance standards. In the case of anything else, we have 5,000 square feet of disturbance as our threshold of meeting the stormwater management ordinance or stormwater management permit. 20,000 square feet of impervious, rooftop, sidewalks, parking lots, whatever, is the threshold of where you get to looking at the stormwater detention. Whether you have wetlands on your property, whether you have an area that's a farm field, 20,000 is that threshold. So as part of that detention, then we'd start looking at soils, we'd start looking at wetlands, we'd start looking at additional impervious that's out there, rooftops, sidewalks, parking, whatever, as part of that engineering analysis.
Yeah. So you're saying in this specific case, the building didn't cause a stormwater issue?
In this case, it meets the ordinance provisions of not needing detention for that property. They got, let's say, a free pass for the existing impervious that was out there prior to the inception of the stormwater management ordinance. So they, just like anybody, if your house or your structure is built prior to the ordinance provision, the ordinance becoming active in 2004, you get a you get that no harm, no foul to you.
Right.
You're not beholden to the requirements today for what you did yesterday.
Right.
So they were underneath the threshold of needing stormwater storage for that ancillary dwelling unit that was out there.
Can I just, I'm sorry, just to clarify that, is that, does that mean the original structure? I mean, how does that, then is not taken into consideration when you're meeting the stormwater requirements for the
whole neighborhood, as part of, let's say, a neighborhood, when a subdivision goes in, you look at where the rooftops are proposed, general, you've got 10 lots. So each of those lots is going to be allowed X number of impervious on your site based on the detention basin characteristics that were engineered and analyzed when the subdivision came in. So let's say each lot is allowed to have 10% lot coverage. Again, we don't go back to that wetlands, there's wetlands on the site, it's a 10%. You just get 10% type of thing. The detention basin is sized for that 10% on each one of those lots. And it also takes into account roads and driveways and stuff like that. But that's how it was done back in the day. Today, we do something very similar, but an engineer is required and a general allowance for each lot is what we go after with respect to, let's say, a subdivision. So again, they weren't even exceeding that criteria either. As part of that, detention is analyzed, the depression, the wetland in the back in 78 when this neighborhood was installed or was created, people stayed out of those low areas, people stayed out of those wetland areas. I can't remember if in the analysis, which wasn't much, that they determined, I don't think they determined a high water elevation, but they just said, kind of stay out of that area type of thing, and people, the developers and the property owners knew, let's put our house on the high spot of the yard versus, back in the low spot in the bowl.
Carolyn Schofield, did you have something?
Yeah, and I don't mean to diminish the issue at hand by any means, but as far as, what I think we need to really focus on is if we want to change the UDO or not. And I know it was a challenge, and we had the discussions back in 2019 as the direction that we wanted to go with this, and for the reasons that Joe mentioned, and the fact that this structure, it could have been a garage, it could have been a storage shed, it could have been, I think we were looking at it from, if we get to more like form-based zoning and what the structure actually is versus kind of the use and the impact, and we were trying to limit the impacts on the outside. Is there really any need to change where we're at? And it's unfortunate that, exceptions arise, because they do. And in any decision I think we make, those exceptions arise. But, is there a suggestion, or is there something that you see, or is there a change that you feel we need to make in order to address this past year and issues that may have come up?
In short, no. We've handled this in the past with subdivisions that have specifically not allowed them, and said, you guys can come back with your proposal. Unfortunately, if you bring up a proposal that complies with our ordinances, we will issue a permit. It doesn't mean that you're going to be okay with your HOA. So please, if someone brings that stuff up, it's not an everyday practice, Carolyn, to your point of for us to say, go check with your HOA, go check with your HOA and everything. Does it highlight it in times like this? Yes. And so we'll probably be vigilant for a little while on it, but in a year, 18 months, it may fall off too.
So I have a question. I'm sorry to interrupt, Renee, because of checking with the HOA on that subject. If the covenants and restrictions they're recorded, correct? So would we have a way to search that? Is there any way, as you said, check with your HOA? Is there any way we could change this ordinance where it would say you need permission from your HOA, or you need to bring us your covenants to show that we aren't, I know I'm opening up a can of worms, but we need some, is there any way we can get control over this, that if your covenants and restrictions don't agree with what you're asking for a permit, we would be able to not issue a permit? is there, good, Joe, you want to weigh in on this before
Yeah,
they, while they think of their
my-
answer?
Well, I'll give them a minute to think about it, because the way I look at this is I think we have two things we could take a look at. One is we could go back to conditional uses, and we could say if you're going to put a second dwelling unit on it, get a conditional use. And we could go back and I don't think it would actually solve anything here, but I do think that it would prevent this in the future. So I think that's one thing we could do and look at. The second thing is, I don't know if we want to take on the task of trying to decide what every homeowners association covenant is. I know they go back, you talk about the 50s, I'm talking about the teens, 1910, 1915. You know, that's when they first started showing up. Now, those showed up for very different purposes, and like I say, we banned all the things dealing on race-based zoning, but that stuff was going on back then. And you know, go look at virtually anything in Wonder Lake or anything on the west side of Crystal Lake, and it has horrible restrictions in the background that we'd all be shocked about today, but they were there then. As far as the number of units, I think it would be pretty straightforward in most cases to say this is how many dwelling units can be here, but I still don't think that stops the guy from putting in the hallway to his granny unit.
Well,
And
it's
so-
900 square feet, how many units can you put in 900 square feet?
Well, it's not that how many, it's the fact that when they were attached together, they just became an addition to your house.
Well, right, but I mean,
And-
on this one, even, I mean, if it's separate, it's only, you can only do 900 square feet.
Yes, that's what I
Right.
was gonna add, is that I think that there was a lot of thought put into the ordinance, because if you have a detached unit, it can only be 900 square feet. It can only be 2 bedrooms. And the property has to be owner occupied. So I couldn't build a 900 square foot unit in my yard and then rent my house and the unit out as well. So I think that there was probably some thought put to, if this were a conditional use, what would the conditions be? So beyond that, those standards, I don't know what other conditions you would really want to put on them. So why make people go through the conditional use process? And when the UDO was passed, they were allowed as conditional use, but there was a board member that was very adamant that there shouldn't be these ancillary dwelling units or mother-in-law suites. So the UDO was passed with basically a moratorium on approving any conditional uses. So between 2014 and 2019, you didn't have any. They didn't come up. They were just built, mother-in-law suites were built with interior doors and that sort of thing, so.
And then correct me if I'm wrong, we tried to limit it to like not rental units to family members, but we couldn't do that legally, correct? Okay, I just, for those that weren't.
That's a Fair Housing Act issue.
Yeah.
Right.
Because they start talking about, they start defining what's a family member, and you start getting into, okay, so if I've got, a former daughter-in-law who wants to move in with my grandkids, is that, a relative?
Right, and I just wanted to clarify, because we had tried that discussion, but,
Yeah, no,
This is
you
clarified.
get into some
Yeah.
problems.
yep.
And the Fair Housing Act is federal, which
Yeah.
takes over anything that we do anyway.
Yeah.
So, Larry, I'll take a stab at your question.
I gave you a reprieve.
You gave me, yeah, and I came up definitely with one.
Okay.
I mean, it's reflective as we go forward with the building code adoptions too. It's static. We would not have the numbers to enforce or carry out such tasks with surety. And what I nod to the building code is we didn't propose the International Property Maintenance Code, which is adopted by basically every municipality in the county and throughout the state. It's one of the more effective codes to maintaining property standards. so that you don't get into dilapidated type standards. And, you know, it raises tax revenue, tax base. It's a very effective code in that regard. But most municipalities that have property maintenance codes adopted have property maintenance staff of 2, 3. City of Elgin has 8 property maintenance inspectors. It's something that is going to be very difficult to pick up. And this wouldn't be for the building inspectors in the building division. This would be for a zoning, the zoning division, who has a leaner staff. But yeah, we've had we're very excited to fill a position on Tuesday that's been vacant 3 times in the last year. So we've been working on a skeleton staff as is. It's not Renee. Every one of those folks have moved on to greener pastures. One is a diplomat. Yeah, so.
I just want to comment about the HOA. I'm helping a friend with her mother's estate, and I was at Sun City. And they're having an estate sale. And they belong to an HOA, right? There is a person that goes through Sun City on a golf cart for compliance of the covenants of the HOA. Get a knock on the door and told us to take the balloons down and put the garage door down. It was amazing to me because I lived in Lake in the Hills. We don't have that kind of enforcement. You know what I'm saying? This woman comes in, barges into the house, thinks I'm the owner, and said, you need to do this, and I said, I'm just a helper, my dear. You need to tell these people over here. And my eyes almost popped out of my head because that's what that person does in the golf cart. Who has that kind of luxury? I know this may seem stupid that I'm bringing this up, but it gets back to municipalities and the kind of ability to do it. I mean, and then people came in and said, oh, did the woman come in with the golf cart? And they knew, the neighbors knew all about this individual roaming. Del Webb is big, you know, in this golf cart. And I just thought, I'm amazed for enforcement. And I don't know if that's going to be the business of what we should be doing, honestly. And I don't think we have the staff to do it. Do you think?
I do not. I would say, from the staffing perspective, we certainly do not. And it's not just being able to man a golf cart or something like that.
Well,
but it would
I mean,
be to
I'm
manage.
not saying you should get a golf cart.
No, of course. We'll take one though. But I mean, no, it would be more keeping up with, you know, this subdivision or this phase of that subdivision.
That's
It doesn't
that's
allow
my point
balloons,
here.
and this one does, you know, or for lack of a better.
Carolyn, did
Well,
you?
and historically, Adam, it was before your time, we've had this discussion before, that there used to be a component on there for an HOA, and it was removed because we had such focus on turnaround time then, and it actually, that was delaying our process because it was delaying it on something that really didn't apply to our codes. So, you know, it was nice to at least let people know about it, that they need to comply with it to avoid any future problems. But, you know, our process hindering on somebody else's rules is not very efficient or effective on our end. So, it has been discussed before and actually was chosen to take this path for
So if that aspect of it isn't realistic, which I understand that what you're saying, and that's fine. We're really back to what Mr. Gottemoeller said earlier, conditional use or not conditional use. I mean, it's one way or the other. There's no way we can put more restrictions, conditions on this particular ordinance for oversight without going to a conditional use permit process of notifying them, whatever. So as a committee, I think we either have that or we don't have that conditional use idea. Or is it something that the committee would want to take to the committee of the whole? It's seems to me that we're planning and development, we're the ones that should hash it out, but I would be open to other committee members' ideas. Joe, did you have something?
Well,
more?
I have one other thing, and the other part of this had a lot to do with water and the dumping of their pool water and what have you. So before we get, I mean, that conditional use part, I think absolutely we need to talk about, but I would like to hear about.
Sure.
I don't know where else you put it.
Dewatering
but-
pools, this is something, as we talked about this over the last couple of weeks, certainly learned more about it. We don't field any complaints about dewatering pools for the end of the season. The RAP, Water Resources Action Plan, does have a component, Carolyn and I were talking a bit about this, where there's guidance for homeowners with chlorinated or bromine treated pools. At the end of the year, they will drain them down. They don't drain them all the way, but they'll drain them down below so that, you know, freeze thaw doesn't impact any of the return intakes or anything like that. So they'll drain it down, and discharge is not to be over the septic, so as to inundate the septic field over the well, to, you know, cause any sort of issues or ponding around the well, so that would ultimately go into the drinking water. Or another indirect response would be ponding, so that there's no animal vectoring harbors or anything along those lines that would create a health ordinance violation. Other than that, it's in the RAP in terms of dewater sensibly. First, to lower the levels of bromine and chlorine is to take your cover off and expose it to sunlight for at least 2 days. At that point, there's an acceptable level of dechlorination, removal of bromine, that can then be dispersed, and then it's a matter of discharging the water via pump or siphoning to a point that it doesn't cause those other issues. That is really, you know, from the Water Resources Action Plan, and then discussions with the Department of Health. Those are the advice given to homeowners. This is the first complaint that I fielded while here and related to dewatering. That kind of sets the scenario a little bit, but there's no regulation per se.
Well, wasn't it in the health department ordinance? I mean, it was just in there. We just talked about it at the county board meeting, didn't we?
It actually is in the state sewage code as well. So it is considered a clear water discharge that is allowed to go to ground surface, provided that it doesn't cause those nuisance conditions or that it, you know, goes into a roadside ditch where it's otherwise prohibited by the road commissioner. Those are the parameters.
And there's a specific section, I remember it was like that.
In the state sewage code?
No,
It's carried over now.
In our
Oh,
ordinance,
okay.
yeah, our
Okay.
ordinance actually does have a specific, we just talked about it at the county board meeting.
Okay.
And I was trying to pull up the number, because I made note of it, but I can't find it right now.
And I had always worried about the chlorine also, but I had understood in talking to Jason Thomas and back when he was in, was that it really only takes a couple of days before it evaporates off to an acceptable level. Because we have pools all over our neighborhood and they've got that hose right to the drain of the street, so.
Okay. So which direction does the committee want to go with this? We've obviously discussed it. Is there anyone that would want to ask staff to come back to change the UDO to require a conditional use permit for the ancillary structures?
I think his suggestion that was made earlier, where we discuss it at the committee of the whole, is a valid one.
That's fine. Carolyn Campbell?
Well, I think, I'm okay with us talking here, but if other people want to take it forward, that's fine. I guess what I was hearing from Renee was, if we do make it a conditional use, what are the conditions that we're going to impose to make them go through that process? Right, and maybe there aren't enough things that we would have to actually warrant the process in the first place. That's what I was hearing. Maybe I'm wrong from what you were saying, but so if I'm wrong, clarify. But
No, yeah, I think the standards that are listed for the use pretty much exhaust the conditions that I can imagine you would want to impose on things.
So we need to be specific about what we think the conditional uses should be in the ordinance. Am I hearing correctly?
Well, what I'm saying is, right now, in order to pull the permit, there's a size limitation, there is a requirement that it be owner occupied, property be owner occupied, there's setback requirements, those sorts of things. So beyond those limitations that we already have in the ordinance, I don't know what you're gonna get out of the conditional use process.
That's where I'm going with
Because what
this.
additional standards are you
Well,
gonna?
I think the big thing would be the notification.
The notification, right?
I mean, that's just a chunk above that's, that's gonna make or break the difference on some of these. And you do the notification, and yeah, they'd probably be, if it was approved, they'd be held to the same standards, we get that, but, there would be the notification part of it.
Can they get that notification when they apply for the permit in the first place? I mean, just as like a standard language that this, this is assuming you've checked with your HOA. I mean, not to qualify it, but
Right.
just that.
I mean, it would be something that would, as we're sitting here, one of the thoughts I had is we're going into the winter where we've been talking about code adoptions, and then that carries with it all the updates to we'll continue, right? All right. That carries with it updates to checklists and all the brochures, everything that's out there, all our outward facing advice. That would be one of the lead items on it, or something that would go across all of our 17 different applications. Can we do that? Yes,
To notice
to
them.
note it,
But not
notice
to hold up their permit, waiting
we wouldn't have
for
we
someone to approve it.
without a conditional use, we wouldn't have any ordinance standards that would, aside from the existing standards that would, if they comply, then we would issue the permit similar to a basement alteration or a bathroom alteration. If they comply, then we would issue.
All right, so otherwise you'd be holding up the whole process just to tell them that they may have an HOA.
Right.
So is that really what we're trying to do, or is that's an extra step for staff as well? But is there a way to, like you said, providing notification that would be?
A parallel but a larger scale example of this is what we faced with new single-family residences within fire districts. The fire district, they have their process, they have a review process. Every one of them, we work with 18 different fire districts, they all have different standards, different ordinances, different levels of intensity and involvement. When we issue a single-family residence, we as the county are unable to hold up any permits because of a fire district objection. That was something that we explored heavily in 2015, I believe, and it was an interpretation through the state Supreme Court that upheld that decision in favor of the property owners and not in favor of the fire districts. So it'd be a very similar inability to enforce that provision for a homeowners association.
Especially if you have a community that has maybe 3 different fire districts, 3 different school districts. I know the village of Lakeland Hills, we have 3 different fire districts. We have 2 different park districts. I mean, the list goes on.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm just thinking out loud. So you think it'd be difficult to specify what those conditional uses would be?
I'm just saying, I think that was well thought out, the standards, and I can't imagine what additional standards. So then the question becomes, are you gonna change it to a conditional use just so if there's a neighbor who doesn't like it, you're gonna deny it? I mean, that's my point.
Well, not necessarily deny it. There's all conditional uses have come before us where there's neighbors that aren't in favor of it, but it gets the transparency, it gets it brought out in the open for everybody to speak their piece on it. And I think some of them would possibly be denied, and some of them wouldn't be, but everybody gets a chance to speak their piece on it before something is affecting the neighborhood of that proportion. I think we're gonna be able to discuss this forever. So what I would like to do or suggest to the committee is that we would have staff bring back a resolution with the conditional use permit being reinstated.
Okay.
And we would talk about this again. Everybody would have some time to research it again, more, if that would be the word. And we'd take it to a vote, because otherwise I don't think we're gonna get anywhere on it.
So it's gonna be coming before us with that
I-
resolution?
that would be my
I
suggestion.
can bring it back next month.
Yeah.
If you want.
I
guess
I'm okay with that.
The
Renee.
question that I have is, are you seeing the conditional use for just the detached or an attached in-law suite as well? Because currently they're tied together. They're kind of the same thing.
That would be for discussion, I guess. I'm thinking,
Okay.
I think it would be both, Mr. Gottemoller.
Okay.
I have one other thing to think about, and that is, if you're gonna regulate this, the other regulation could be to regulation based on a lot size. Okay, so if you've got a 1 acre E1 lot, does that give you enough room to allow you to have this ancillary dwelling unit? If you've got a 3 acre, which is what this is on, is that enough? If you're at a farm piece in Ag 1, you know, and you're 10 acres or 30 acres, that's another way you could look at regulating this. And I don't necessarily,
A minimum lot size, yeah.
you know that I have the answer to it. I just think that, you know, if this was an R1 lot, I don't think it would be appropriate to have an ancillary dwelling unit on it.
Well, they wouldn't be able to meet the setbacks.
Yeah,
probably.
they would need to
I agree,
the
so
we
but,
have, we
impervious
have something
surface.
in there for some of that, but.
okay.
What if you had the conditional use permit only for those ancillary dwellings located in a subdivision?
I mean, that may be
That's
the
kind of
answer.
what we're talking about, right?
I don't know that I have
Because then you
all,
won't have to affect the farm dwellings and things like that.
That would be any subdivision that had an HOA, and we wouldn't necessarily review the covenants or restrictions of the HOA. It was just if they had an HOA and they were a subdivision, then it would bounce it to a conditional use permit. It's not gonna solve every problem, I
No,
agree.
I know,
And we
I
can
just-
certainly, I'm not saying that we wouldn't vote this down or up. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
we gotta get to somewhere to make a decision, and we're not getting there today.
Oh, I guess the other question I have is how often this kind of situation comes before us?
This is the first time.
Are we
This is
just
the
really
first
dealing
complaint.
with an exception here?
we are dealing with
And-
an exception.
We have issued, I believe, 7 detached ancillary dwelling units since it was adopted in 2019. There's 6 or 7 attached and another 6 or 7 detached.
Could you give us some statistics, and I know you don't have it right now, is how many of those were in a subdivision and how many were agriculture?
yeah.
Sure.
May give us a little better picture on what we're dealing with, and then forego the part about the
And how many?
special use permit for right now.
HOAs?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but I'll have that next month when I bring you the text amendment.
Yeah,
Okay,
maybe that would give us a direction to go on how we want to handle this.
sure.
Sure.
Is that
That's
acceptable?
fine with me. Yeah,
And
let's-
so we can
let's-
move on then from this
Okay.
today? Okay, good. And it's after 10:30 already, so I'd suggest that we take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll be everybody back in about 10 minutes, please, and
Yes, I
fire us up back there, right? We good? We're back on. So, okay, we'll move on to 6.2, the McHenry County Department of Health Ordinance revisions. I put a copy in front of everybody, just to keep this moving along. And now we're gonna get Patty to go through it with us.
Yeah, so thank you. I'd just like to bring it forward to this committee because, particularly with water wells and private sewage, and the impact on development, et cetera, I just want to be sure you're comfortable with what's in there. But I'm going to give you the abbreviated version today, if that's okay, and please stop me if you have a question. So we have done our best to notify anyone that would be interested in it, so professional organizations, other agencies, the regulated community, et cetera, notified them specifically about the changes and solicited comments. We've also had 4 meetings on the ordinance, 2 public meetings, and then 2 meetings for our food establishment, water well, and private sewage professionals, so a total of 28 people attended those. And we've got a total of 88 comments to date on the ordinance, and so 23 of those comments have been incorporated into the ordinance. They were mostly, clarifications, typos, things like that, but also some substantive things. And I had reached out to everyone that provided a comment and then provided our justification for either including or not including that comment into the ordinance. So right now where we are is we are still awaiting the comments from the McHenry County State's Attorney's Office, the formal review, and then I am still waiting for my approval from the Illinois Department of Public Health for the water well ordinance, which we hope to have both of those shortly. If you don't have any significant concerns with the ordinance proposals today, then it will go on 30-day review and then go through the normal county board process after this. So I was just going to go through very quickly and highlight what I consider the most substantive ones on each of these, and then Mary Ellen has 2 substantive ones from the animal control ordinance. So Article 1 is our overarching article, and really it's just a matter of incorporating definitions, purposes, things like that, strengthening this ordinance and reducing duplication in the other articles. In Article 2, we're just proposing to add a requirement for our personal care providers. So we get about a dozen complaints a year with like manicures, pedicures, things like that, where they're not sanitizing properly. This will just give us an option to actually enforce those more quickly. On Article 3, that's our retail food ordinance, and the 2 substantive issues would be to reduce our inspection frequency on our Category 2 facilities to align with the state health department's requirements. So go down to 1 from 2, and then we've added just some references for clarifications on the appeals process.
And what are Category 2 compared to?
Those would be your fast food mostly, so prepared food for service, prepared for the same day.
Prepared food, kind of thing. Okay,
exactly.
Thanks.
And then Article 4, which is our wastewater and private sewage. We received the most comments on this one, almost 80 comments on this. That's very typical. Most of them were technical and clarifications, but I wanted to bring just a couple things to your attention. Generally, we are trying to codify several processes that we have, kind of for transparency and just make it clear what the people would need to do to be compliant. So that includes our off-site and shared private sewage disposal systems, and also for maintenance of private sewage disposal systems. So we're not suggesting that people need to go out and, we're not monitoring that they're pumping the system more frequently, all those types of things. It's just vegetative cover, inoperable units, things like that, if you're in an area that's subject to flooding, what you should or should not be doing. So it's really a matter of just making it more clear for the regulated public. And then we did add a couple additional situations where we would consider it to be a malfunctioning private sewage disposal system. Again, this is nothing new than what we do, it just provides it actually in writing. So inoperable devices, and if we grant approval of a system with conditions, that they need to adhere to those conditions, and so it just gives us a little bit more flexibility. The comment, we received the most comments on the following one, which is the majority of systems installed now are actually plastic chambers. And so we have proposed that there be just a piece of iron placed at the beginning and end of those so that people can actually locate them in the future. So we've had discussions with our installers, et cetera, and I think we've reached a way to do that doesn't add significant cost to the systems, and I think they can do it very easily. And then I did want to bring to your attention, unincorporated subdivision served by IEPA permitted technology, so one similar to the Hennings Estates. We try to clean up that language and to ensure that the approved system that they get the permit for will actually be adequate to serve a number of lots in the subdivision. So that would be probably the biggest change there. Article 5 is water well 1, and what we did with this was try to get provide parity with the private sewage one, so that most of these things that I've already talked about, they're kind of then mirrored in this one. But the one that I wanted to bring to your attention would be that we are proposing to require that if there is new construction, that the water well meet new construction requirements. And so that can, it sounds very simple for a new house, et cetera, that's really typically not an issue, but you know, people that want to rebuild on smaller lots, we will still have the same exemptions for fires destroyed by fire, or if it's an unsound structure, to give them opportunities to do that. But our intention would be that people are not using substandard water wells to serve brand new houses. And then lastly, in the water well ordinance, we've just provided some clarification about the sampling that's required for a new or modified or replaced water well. And the idea here is really we're going to provide a lot of information if it's an arsenic issue or a coliform issue, and rely strictly on E. coli positive samples as the cutoff for whether or not a water well would be approved or not. It will just streamline the process, because oftentimes a homeowner will have to get 3 or 4 samples to get it cleared up, and really it's not a huge public health concern. So, Mary Ellen has a couple.
So really the only 2 things I think are pertinent for you to know would be that we are increasing the fine for animals that are not vaccinated and decreasing the fine for animals that are not registered. We really want to put that emphasis on animals being vaccinated and less of the emphasis on just being registered, although registration is very important so that we know where the animals are in the county. The other is that we are no longer going to be enforcing barking nuisances in municipalities. We're going to be focusing on the unincorporated areas. Most of those barking complaints are coming at nighttime, and our officers are doing priority calls at nighttime. We're not doing the calls for barking nuisances in the evening, and that's when most of those are happening. It's very, very difficult for us to enforce those anyway. Municipalities have been enforcing them and have noise ordinances in most of their code anyway, so it's more appropriate for them to be doing it.
Do you, what is the amount of the increase and decrease?
Vaccination will be increased to $200 fine, and registration will be $100 fine.
And what are they currently?
They are currently $50 for vaccination and $200 for registration.
So $50 now for registration.
Correct.
No, 100 for registration.
That's what it's going to now.
It's going to, yeah.
Okay, because I thought I heard you say that you're gonna decrease the fine for registration, but it's going from 50 to...
No, registration is $200 right now, and we're decreasing it to $100.
Okay, okay.
The vaccination is $50 right now, and we're increasing it to $200.
Okay.
That's for the violation if they're not.
That's a violation. That's when you fail to vaccinate or registered after 30 days.
Mm-hmm.
It's 30 days, 60 days, 90 days. There's different time frames for those.
An animal. Talking cats?
Cats and dogs, yes.
Okay.
Do you have any questions on any of that for us, or any concerns?
I guess I have a question. How do you find out when the cats aren't vaccinated and dogs aren't vaccinated?
Most of the time we're finding out because we have to go there for some other call. And they have multiple animals in the house. So it could be a cruelty call, it could be a running at large call, another nuisance complaint that we've had. But I will also tell you, because we've offered a number of discounts in vaccinations and registrations over the last couple of years, and we're going to continue doing that for a few more years. We have more cats that are being vaccinated.
Mm-hmm.
So I think we've got up about 12,000 cats being vaccinated in the county.
Does that include like barn cats and stuff?
Barn cats are exempt. Although we do encourage barn cats and TNR cats to be spay and neutered and vaccinated before they're released. So they're getting at least one vaccination.
Okay, any other questions or anything else?
Thank you.
Okay.
We appreciate
Thank
it.
you.
We move on to the routine consent agenda. It's my understanding that 7-1 is not ready for our
Correct.
review, so
Yeah, I got duped by East Drive, I think, a little bit, and approved, sorry. That's gonna be tied with the budget approval.
Oh, so we're removing 7-1 because it's not.
7-1 is off. Any other on the routine consent agenda that anyone wants to be removing?
Well, I'm gonna end up pulling all of them, I think. My question number 7, 3, 7, 4, and 7, 5 all goes together. It's all the same question. But I don't know which one to pull to answer that
Oh,
question.
that's all right.
Yes.
So then, those are the building
Pull all of
codes?
them and just lump them together.
Oh, pull them all together, yeah, all right, lump them together, okay, sounds good.
Okay. So,
So I'll move to approve 7.2, and then we'll come and do the other 3 next.
Yeah.
okay, I didn't catch whether 7-2 was connected in there. It's not.
Well, no, I'll pull that
No,
one
but
to
it's all, but it's
discuss.
all,
Yeah.
it's all separate.
Yeah,
So it's all separate. So we're starting with 7-2, okay.
I'll move to approve 7.2.
I'll second that.
Okay, we have Mr. Godemuller motion, Teresa seconded for 7.2. Discussion. Carolyn Schofield.
Can you explain this? I thought we did this.
So it was, we've seen it a couple times.
Right.
Are we on to?
Yeah, we saw it in May, yeah, we saw it in May, but the work and everything associated with the violation wasn't completed.
So
And then
we
we saw it
continue.
incrementally.
Cody works on the back to us, right?
It was, yeah, it was tabled, I'm sorry, the variation was approved, the fence was removed, so most of the violations were abated, and that was once concluded. The direction was to bring it back once those issues are resolved.
Okay,
So
okay.
we are at that status at this point.
Okay. I'm fine with it. I was fine with you first.
All right, so this penalty fee was for not getting the fence zoned or permanent, and then now the fence is gone now, is that correct?
Correct, the fence is compliant.
So it's
Correct.
compliant,
It's reduced, they reduced that.
the size, okay.
And what was
And then
coverage?
the variation was, it was an 81% coverage, impervious area coverage, and that was approved by the county board at the past board cycle.
Okay.
But-
Carolyn Campbell?
Okay, sorry, needed to catch up because I needed to say something before. So, so part of the argument is that they feel the waiver is justified because the provisions of the UDO fail to accommodate the conditions existing on this property. But in actuality, the penalty was because they didn't apply for it in the first place.
It was worked out without a permit, yeah, and zoning approval will be part of that permit.
Right, so he would have been able to address that issue had he just come in and gotten the permit in the first place?
That's true.
Correct.
So, okay. So that, and that's the argument that's being used, that created the hardship. Right, the violation would result in expenses such as attorney and engineering fees. Would he not have had to, well, the attorney fees are because of the fact that he was in violation of the permit and he brought the attorney in. I guess I'm not,
In part, yeah, I mean, you're not required to have an attorney for the conditional uses or variations, but certainly they use one on this and as part of the other management of the violation. So yeah, that would be part of it. The engineering, I don't think they would be getting around those costs, but they were part of it, correct?
that's part of the permitting
Part
process.
of the permitting process.
But as attorneys, if he's, I didn't mean to interrupt, Carolyn, but if he'd went through the process correctly, he would have had an attorney to go through to get the variance probably anyway. So it isn't like the attorney come in just because of our fine.
Correct.
Go ahead. I'm sorry to interrupt, Carolyn. Did you want to finish?
No, that was,
Okay,
oh,
Joe?
well, I might hear, but go ahead.
My circumstance, I look at this and go, this was an unusual, difficult piece of property to work with. He didn't make it better by trying to pretend it wasn't unusual and different. That said, it's fixed, it's been taken care of. County's not going broke over the amount of money we're talking about here. I would give him the break and let's move on.
I agree. I agree with that.
Is there any other comments? You know, this is just something to me that we have the fines in place for a reason, and you did not follow the process, so I don't agree with you, Mr. Cattermiller, on this
No
one.
problem.
So, any other discussion? Okay, we'll go to vote. Michelle?
Yes.
Carolyn Schofield?
Yes.
Carolyn Campbell?
No.
Joe?
Yes.
Teresa?
No?
Paula?
Yes.
And I'll vote no. I think that is 4 yeses, 3 noes. Okay. So that we go to, pardon?
Goes on to the board.
Goes on to the board as a yes vote from this committee.
I'll bring forward 7.3, 7.4, and 7.5.
7.3, 7.4, and 7.5 are being brought forth together as a unit by Mr. Gottemoller, seconded by Michelle. Discussion. Teresa?
So the question was, for these, so look at the minimum fines and then maximum fines. Which of these fines are for the, move now, International Building Code, International Residential Code? I guess those are the two ones,
Sure.
those fine codes are both of those.
So the codes themselves, the raw codes do not impose any fines. They don't prescribe them, they refer it over to the agencies that are enforcing them. So historically, this would be the third one that I've inherited and looked at and proposed that would have this sort of a structure where it's in the resolution itself and part of the adopting ordinance. So each one of the charts, whether it's the building code or the residential code, those charts are identical.
They are, right, yes.
And how they're organized is by the census code. So it would be 100s and 105s, that's single family or residential construction. And then it gets into the 200s to 300s, and that's commercial construction. And then it starts to get into very specific ones like cell towers and cell transmission towers, residential alterations, which is a different type, a little bit lower end, and then minor construction in various categories and signs. So it's the higher level ones and the ones that I can say that probably represent 95 to maybe all of our violations are going to be the enforcement of the building code or the residential codes. The other codes that are up for adoption, the ancillary codes, they all have language in there in terms of citation, the ability for jurisdictions to cite on those codes, whether it's the mechanical code or fuel gas or NEC. But the way the county has organized it in really a manner to be expeditious and clear is to have all of those channel to one determination. It's either residential or it's commercial. And then that's where our fines are prescribed from that point.
All right, so then in some cases, so I'm looking at 7.3, the minimum fine code gives you the amounts, and then it says the maximum code, be it further ordained, the maximum fine for violation of the International Residential Code shall be $200 per offense.
Correct, that's for residential.
Yeah.
That would be, so if someone does an addition or even constructs a house without a permit, it would be $200.
So the minimum and the maximum might be the same?
Typically they are. Very, very rarely when we're in OB court, do we go above the minimum fines. There's a few times that we have, and it's usually repeat again offenders. And that's, when we do that, the judges actually make us prove it up. So we have to present our case in those scenarios. And so the state's attorney's office historically has just said, hey, is it worth it? And sometimes it's not. And we'll just have the discussions with those folks to say, hey, if you don't get a permit within 60 days, 90 days, we'll refile a violation. So very, very rarely do we ever go above the minimum fines.
Now, it looked like in some cases it's being said that it is. It's the maximum and the minimum are the same amount. So.
Oh, I see.
Yes.
I see. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Let me pull that, because we want the ability to go up.
I'm on page 129 and 130.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I do see it. I think that should be the minimum, not maximum, in the further be ordained on the fourth to last one. It should be minimum, not maximum.
Good catch.
Good catch,
Look at me, I'm a reader.
good catch, Teresa.
On both of those.
Both, the other one shows me, so the other one says maximum of $500. On, 7.2s, on 7.2s,
Sure.
it says the maximum is $500.
And that's for commercial.
Yeah,
So
it's for
those are,
commercial,
yeah,
right.
those are, the minimum fines on those have always been prescribed at $500.
Right, but it also says maximum
Yeah,
on 7.2.
it's-
So for both 7.2 and 7.3, then we need to have an amendment to change the be further ordained then to minimum fine instead of maximum fine?
I would agree, but we wouldn't necessarily need the amendment at this point. Right now, what we're looking for is we're looking to put these, go forward for 30-day review. And so at that point, that we can make some of these adjustments if we've got additional
So you want
comments.
feedback from us today?
All right.
Feedback or opening the start of feedback. So we would look at this over the next month to go forward. Corrections like this are paramount.
All right, so yeah, there's an issue on both 7.2 and 7.3.
Yep, I got them both now.
Okay.
Right out of the gate.
All right, well, I'm glad I read and
Yeah.
didn't read badly.
Well, are you gonna, can you correct that before we set it to the board for the 30-day review?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll make that
Yeah,
adjustment
Go
before.
ahead, go ahead, I would say fix that.
Yeah.
We don't need to be doing that at a meeting in 30
Yeah,
days.
I
Just,
agree.
put a different number in so we got a minimum and a maximum.
Sure. Okay.
Okay, is there any other discussion regarding that? We'll go to vote then. Carolyn Schofield,
Yes.
Carolyn Campbell,
Yes.
Joe,
Yes?
Teresa,
Yes.
Paula,
Yes.
Michelle,
Yes.
and I'll vote yes. That moves on to the routine consent to old business. There is no old business, reports. Zoning applications going before the county board. Is Renee still here? Renee?
I'm still here. I'm gonna make this very quick, because if you guys have questions, you know where to find me. There's 3 going before you this month. The first one is an A1 to A2, classic, no controversy. The Schroeder petition is A1, B, and B1 to B3. So that's in Marengo on Grant Highway and Marengo Road. It's near where they just put the roundabout in, near the Old West town.
No, it's not.
So they are going from the A1 in a very small portion of the property's B2 to a B3 zoning. So there was no opposition at the hearing for that. The comp plan shows the majority of that property being retail in the future. They're not proposing retail, but the B3 would be the appropriate zoning for retail there. So that's going with a 7-0 recommendation. And then the last one is a variation for someone to add a second floor to their garage. So they're asking for a height variation and a setback variation. You might hear from the neighbor of that property. There was a neighbor that was very opposed to it. His complaint was that with the additional height, it was gonna shade his driveway to the point that ice wouldn't melt. The petitioner presented evidence about the way the sun shines to the point that it satisfied the hearing officer, Mike McHenry. He doesn't think that'll be a problem and he's recommending approval. But you might be contacted by that property owner. And that's it.
Thank you, Renee. Future topics, executive session not needed, a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Paula, seconded by Teresa. All those in favor to adjourn, say aye.
Aye.
Okay, thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you.